Welcome to The Explainer. We're jumping straight into the newly released Spring Economic Update 2026 today. We're going on a macro to micro journey, breaking down the massive global forces reshaping the economy right now and tracing them all the way down to the actual dollars in your wallet.
Right at the top of the report, we hit this core mystery. If the economy is growing, and the national data says it is, why do our budgets feel so incredibly tight? There's this huge, confusing disconnect between that macroeconomic success and the reality of strained household finances. Why is it so tough to balance the checkbook at the end of the month?
Well, the report actually doesn't shy away from this. It totally validates your lived experience. I'm going to read this exact quote directly from the text. Essential expenses, particularly groceries and housing, have risen sharply since 2019, and these higher price levels are straining household budgets even as inflation remains within the target control range. So the source material is formally acknowledging this affordability crisis right off the bat.
Section 1. Global Shocks and Trade. A Chaotic World Stage. To really understand the pressure on our local budgets, we've got to zoom out first. We are dealing with a profoundly chaotic world stage right now, and these international shocks are the origin point for the costs trickling down to us. We're facing two massive global threats simultaneously. On one hand, you've got the Middle East conflict, which is severely disrupting key shipping routes, especially through the Strait of Hormuz, and damaging critical energy infrastructure. On the other hand, elevated U.S. tariffs are creating ongoing uncertainty, weighing really heavily on global trade and Canadian exports.
And just look at the impact of those shipping disruptions. West Texas Intermediate crude oil prices surged over 30%. The report notes some extreme market volatility here. We're talking intraday swings, pushing prices rapidly between 80 and nearly 120 US dollars a barrel in just a matter of weeks. Absolutely wild.
Over on the trade side, things have fundamentally shifted. The average U.S. tariff rate on imports skyrocketed from roughly 2.5% back in early 2025 to around 11% today. That is a persistent, heavy drag on global economic activity, forcing businesses and consumers to just absorb the shock.
Section 2. Canada's Economic Shield. Surprising national resilience.
Okay, let's dive into this. Against that chaotic backdrop of surging oil and heavy tariffs, the Canadian economy has actually managed to act as a remarkably effective shield. Despite the headwinds, Canada successfully avoided a recession. According to IMF data cited in the update, Canada is actually projected to post 1.5% real GDP growth in 2026. That makes it the second fastest growth rate in the entire G7, right behind the US, totally outpacing major economies like France, the UK, and Germany.
A huge driver of this economic resilience is a seriously robust labor market. Since the start of 2025, Canada has added nearly 3 times as many jobs per capita as the United States. We're looking at 3.4 jobs per 1,000 people compared to just 1.2 south of the border. And it's worth noting, the report specifically points out that the vast majority of these new jobs were generated by the private sector.
Now here's a fact from the report I found absolutely fascinating. Canada ranks first in the G7 for per capita inward foreign direct investment. No way, right? But it's true. Despite all the global trade uncertainty, global capital clearly remains highly confident in the Canadian market as a safe, lucrative place to invest.
Section 3. The Affordability Disconnect. The Micro Lens.
So here's the big question. If this macroeconomic shield is holding up so well, if we avoided a recession, jobs are up, investment is flowing in, why does a simple trip to the grocery store feel like a complete financial crisis? Well, the report clarifies a crucial distinction here. We constantly hear about inflation rates stabilizing, right? Which just means prices are growing slower, staying within the Bank of Canada's target range. But price levels represent the actual cost of goods. And those levels have risen 30% since 2019 for basic needs. They remain a structurally elevated, heavy burden on households.
You really feel this when you look at your grocery cart. The report points out that food inflation is being heavily skewed by just a few specific items: beef, coffee, confectionery, and lettuce. Because Canada imports 75% of its fresh produce, these specific, weather-dependent, heavily imported items spiked an incredible 21% in price. It totally distorts the cost of your overall grocery basket.
But it's not all tough news on the micro level. The source details a really positive development in housing. National average asking rents have actually dropped nearly 9% from their recent peak.
The report attributes this drop directly to improving supply conditions, which is being driven by a record surge in purpose-built rental construction across the country.
Section 4. Relief and Policy Actions. The government's response.
So, what is the government actually doing about this complex mix of strong national data and tight household budgets? The spring update outlines a targeted suite of policy actions. They lay out a specific three-pillar strategy. Step 1. Provide direct financial relief to household budgets. Step 2. Intervene to reduce key cost pressures where they can influence volatile prices. And Step 3. Tackle those long-term, structural supply drivers that push costs up in the first place.
In practice, the update highlights 3 flagship measures. First, a temporary suspension of the federal fuel excise tax to lower transportation costs. Second, the rollout of a new Canada Groceries and Essentials benefit, aiming to provide relief to about 12 million Canadians. And third, the Build Canada Homes Initiative, which is actively funding provincial housing supply projects to bring down shelter costs.
And the report notes an immediate, real-world effect from that first measure. Within just a single day of the fuel tax suspension kicking in on April 20th, retail gasoline prices reliably dropped by 12 cents per liter across the country. That's a direct, measurable pass-through of savings to the consumer right at the pump.
Section 5. Future Scenarios and Finances. Looking ahead.
Let's zoom back out for a second. How do these localized policy choices and massive global realities affect Canada's future financial standing? Forecasting right now is obviously tricky, so the update responsibly models 2 highly divergent paths. The optimistic higher investment scenario assumes high global oil prices will improve Canada's terms of trade, driving massive national income and domestic energy investment. Then there's the pessimistic global supply disruption scenario, modeling what happens if prolonged shipping disruptions trigger wider global inflation and weaker growth here at home.
Ultimately, the crucial point is how this all lands on the national balance sheet. Despite the uncertainty and the cost of those new relief measures, the government projects that the current $67 billion deficit will gradually shrink over the next 5 years. They're projecting it'll hit $53 billion by 2030, anchored by their stated commitment to completely eliminate day-to-day operating deficits by 2028-2029.
Which brings us to a final, really fascinating question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. How will the stability of the global stage ultimately shape the reality of your local wallet? I mean, we've seen today how an international shipping lane thousands of miles away can directly dictate the price of your coffee and your gas. It's an incredibly interconnected world, and understanding it is the first step to navigating it. Thanks for joining me to break down the Spring Economic Update 2026. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.